It was easier for me to imagine a world without a creator than one with a creator full of all the contradictions of the world. That's what Simone de Beauvoir wrote in the first volume of her autobiography. A sentence like that could only come from someone who has looked the world straight in the eye without ever looking away. Her philosophy might be called cutting, but she never intended to offend religion or those who believe. She wasn't trying to provoke or attack faith for the sake of it. It was rather the result of a clear-headed reflection, shaped deep within her lived experiences. She looked at the world in its entirety with a gaze that could see both its beauty and its cruelty, its incoherence. And when she asked herself sincerely whether a creator could truly be compatible with the madness of a world marked by suffering, injustice, and senseless pain, her answer was clear. It was more honest to accept the absence of God than to force him to coincide with a world that made no sense. It might sound absurd, and yet her thoughts almost seem like an act of extreme respect, as if she wanted to protect the idea of God from the most brutal parts of life on earth: human cruelty, destruction, indifference. In an interview given in 1959, at the age of 51, she said, "As a child, I had a burning faith. I truly believed in Jesus, but later, I began to believe less and less in that somewhat mythological external version of God, and more in a purified idea of him, until I had refined him so much that he no longer had any connection with the world, because God couldn't possibly be as foolish as the devout people I met, or the priests I spoke to." With those words, she described her detachment from religion in a direct and personal way. A slow and lucid process, with no dramatic breaks, but also with no return. Simone de Beauvoir was born in Paris in 1908 into a bourgeois Catholic family. As a child, she was a believer. She turned to God like many at that age, but over time she began to question everything she had been taught. "I realized I had no reason to believe, and that the people around me believed without really having any reason either. It's not just a personal crisis. It's a reflection on the very nature of inherited faith, passed down through generations, rarely questioned." De Beauvoir explains that at a certain point, God simply stopped having a role in her life. He no longer answered the important questions, nor offered any real direction. God ended up no longer answering anything or anyone. And in that evaporation of the divine, there's no scandal. If anything, there's the chance to start from scratch. The human being, finally alone, no longer has anyone to delegate their existence to. But what does it mean to live in a world without God? According to de Beauvoir, it means taking full responsibility for every choice. Existentialism, of which she was a key voice alongside Jean-Paul Sartre, rejects any idea of a predefined essence. Human beings are not born with a purpose, nor do they carry a nature assigned by some higher power. They become what they choose to be. And this freedom, which might first appear as a burden, is in fact the greatest opportunity for authenticity. As she put it, the present is not a potential past. It is a moment of choice and action. In this ever-flowing time, every person is called to decide, to choose, to take a stand. But choosing is never a solitary act. In a world without dogmas, without top-down orders, relationships with others become the very foundation of ethics. Each person is connected to everyone else, and no one can realize themselves except with and through others. Responsibility, then, isn't just about oneself. It's about those around us. No universal morality handed down by a transcendent God, but a concrete, earthly ethics built in everyday interaction with other human beings. That's why, for de Beauvoir, the value of a life isn't measured in absolute terms, but through the value one is able to bring to the lives of others. A person's life has value when they give value to the lives of others. And here, There's no religion to guide or justify. There is only conscience, in its bare form, to navigate choices. Even for those who believe, she said, there's not much difference. Believers, in the end, interpret God according to their own conscience, and every conscience remains just as alone as mine, which does not believe. Faith, in this sense, doesn't offer more certainty. On the contrary, it can become a refuge to escape responsibility. Not always, of course. De Beauvoir always acknowledged the honesty of certain priests and believers who fought for justice. But she warned against those religious settings where God was used as a justification for oppression, war, or colonialism. Even when one believes in revelation, there's still the problem of interpretation. Does God want us to oppress the Algerians or fight against oppression? Her hunger for truth never stopped, not even in the face of pain, not even in the face of death. In her work A Very Easy Death, she recounts the final days of her mother with a dry, stripped-down style, free from sentimentality. Death is shown for what it is: concrete, relentless, inevitable, but also revealing. That experience, as painful as it was, allowed her to rediscover a connection with her mother that perhaps had remained hidden during her life. At the end, the nurse said, "She died so well," and that's where the title came from. De Beauvoir always lived with ruthless coherence. She didn't like to perform. She didn't try to seem likable. She's been described as cold, distant, overly rational. But those who knew her tell a different story, that of a woman who was intense, curious, deeply passionate, capable of laughing, crying, and loving. After Sartre's death, she went through difficult times, marked by betrayals, legal battles, and personal disappointments. But she didn't bend. She kept writing, bearing witness, staying present in the world. Her relationship with Sartre, which lasted a lifetime, was the most visible symbol of her lived philosophy. They never married, never lived together in a traditional way, but remained bound by a deep sense of fidelity. A fidelity not measured by exclusivity, but by sincerity, shared freedom, and intellectual complicity. True love and real generosity is giving all of oneself, but feeling as if it cost nothing. That line perfectly captures their bond, a relationship that wasn't about possession, but revelation. It didn't seek certainties, but truth. Throughout her life, Simone de Beauvoir never stopped questioning existence, even in its darkest corners. She didn't look for shortcuts. She didn't need dogmas. She believed in freedom, in responsibility, and in the possibility of building meaning without God. An uncomfortable stance, perhaps, but brutally honest. The absence of God in her philosophy isn't a hole to fill. It's a space to inhabit, a void that demands action, that pushes each person to become who they are. No afterlife promises, no easy consolations, just one's conscience, just other people. Simone de Beauvoir died in Paris in 1986 at the age of 78 due to pneumonia. She was buried next to Sartre in the Montparnasse Cemetery, where their unconventional story found its final earthly chapter. But the ideas she left behind continue to challenge us. Because when one chooses to live without God, or even dares to question His presence, the questions don't disappear. They only grow louder. What does it truly mean to believe today? Is it a need, a choice, or just a habit never questioned? Can a life, a deep, ethical life, be built without God? And if so, what is it built upon?